Friends, boom, bada boom. Russians' walls were shaking. More than 200 drones attacked Russia. A military airfield in Engels was hit. Strategic bombers that attacked Ukraine were damaged, as well as depots with FABs, CABs, and cruise missiles. Moreover, it is reported that Kh 555 and Kh 101 missiles for the Tu-95 and Tu-160 have been damaged. In Kuban, Russia, the Kavkazskaya oil pumping station has been burning for almost 2 days now after a drone attack. The GUR successfully attacked Russian targets in temporarily occupied Crimea. Air defense systems, naval vessels, and a helicopter were hit, and 13 Russian radar stations were destroyed. And in Russia, they claim that the Ukrainian armed forces attempted to break through into the Belgorod region. What is known about this? We will discuss all of this with the well-known military analyst Roman Svetan. Roman Grigorievich, welcome.
Thank you. I wish everyone good health.
Dear audience, please like this video and write a few kind words in support of Ukraine in the comments. Roman Grigorievich, how many bombers were damaged? Because according to the information I have, there were several bombers there and one Il, which delivered the missiles. Here it says that in the morning, an IL-76 arrived at the base, likely delivering a new batch of A-101 missiles. And there were 3 Tu-95MS and 2 Tu-160S at Engels. What do you think?
Well, they were definitely damaged. The question is, to what extent? Why? Because there was a large-scale attack, both with drones and most likely with a missile. That boom, since it's a boom, then the fifth element that broke through the roof, if anyone remembers that movie, was most likely one of our missiles, not ruling out the possibility of even using a long-range Neptune. In that direction, and naturally the detonation that occurred after the strike, as well as the detonation of missiles, aerial bombs, and small arms ammunition, which are also loaded onto aircraft, damaged, of course, the planes standing nearby. They simply could not have avoided being damaged. The question is, to what extent were they damaged? I think within a few days, our intelligence, our general staff will confirm after retrieving information from satellites and images, decoding them, in other words, using objective monitoring tools. And then we'll be able to celebrate once again. Maybe in the next stream, we'll be able to confirm this with certainty.
Roman Nikolaevich, so what could have been hit? So the bombers themselves, a warehouse with cruise missiles and a warehouse with aviation fuel. In other words, these elements were the targets of Ukraine's armaments, our missiles, and our
drones. Any strategic bomber base is, just to give you a comprehensive idea, like a truly vast and sprawling large city, where, in addition to the primary airfield itself, a truly huge and significant number of essential infrastructure facilities of various complex levels are intricately involved to fully support its extensive operations, starting from the crucial underground ones. Fuel storage facilities holding tens of thousands of tons of aviation kerosene, and ending with various warehouses, and most importantly, the special engineering service for missile preparation, as well as, of course, the storage of aerial bombs and missiles used by these strategic bombers. By the way, not many people talk about this, but further south of Engels, several dozen kilometers along the left bank of the Volga, there is another facility, the so-called Saratov 63. This is a nuclear storage facility. More precisely, it is a storage facility for nuclear warheads for strategic and tactical aviation. In other words, there are significant stockpiles of the 12th GUMO there, the 12th main directorate of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, specifically of tactical nuclear weapons. Just a few dozen kilometers away, and the mushroom cloud wouldn't be like the one over Engels. It would be a real massive one all the way to Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan, the Kazakhs would have seen it themselves. It's just a shame. I have too many friends in Kazakhstan, so of course I'd hate to disappoint them like that. But nevertheless, this is a serious facility, and to take it out, not just with missiles or drones, to level it completely, you'd need several squadrons of bombers carpet bombing the place. But if you blow up this underground, let me repeat, the fuel storage contains tens of thousands of tons of aviation kerosene, which is used by strategic bombers. A single bomber like the Tu-160 takes on board the equivalent of 3 railroad tank cars of this kerosene. They fill more than 150 tons of aviation kerosene there, and for the Tu-95, it's 1 railroad tank car, which is also quite a lot. So there are definitely reasons to strike there. And regarding the damage that could be inflicted on this entire facility, it could be catastrophic for the Russians. By the way, it was to Engels that we once handed over our 2 planes Tu-160, Tu-95, Tu-22, our own Kasha-55s. Hundreds of missiles were handed over to Kuchma back then. It was Kuchma who was dealing with all that, at least at the time. And now basically we're going to try to destroy what used to be ours. The strategic bombers we handed over to the Russians. As for what exactly was hit, we'll know for sure in a few days, once the satellite images have been analyzed.
Roman Yegorovich, how many military personnel are usually stationed at such air bases, at military airfields?
Well, the thing is, they perform different tasks, and the area involved varies as well. There should be at least a regiment stationed there, that's for sure. About 1,500 Russian troops should be involved in this operation. 1,500 to 2,000.
Could we have eliminated enemy personnel with these strikes, Roman Igorovich?
Absolutely 100%. The thing is, even the SIS, the Engineering and Technical Service, a special engineering service, naturally there's also the security and defense of the facility itself and the storage of the missiles. Missiles aren't stored like matches after all. There are even certain climate control mechanisms in place, especially for missiles of this kind. So several dozen people were probably definitely taken out, and the remaining hundreds were certainly cleared out by that strike. Believe me, the shockwave was felt all the way in Syria.
Roman Igorovich, it's true, the Kavkazskaya oil pumping station has been burning for almost a full day now after the drone attack. And everyone is talking about the long-range Neptune, the modified missile. Let's discuss this missile, as well as the strikes on oil refineries, bases, and on Kavkazskaya, which has been burning for almost 2 days now.
Days. Malyuk and Budanov sanctions have now become the sanctions of Ukraine's defense forces. Why? Because in such strikes like the one on Engels, the security service of Ukraine and special operations forces were naturally involved. So that's the minimum. And probably also the Navy, if Neptune was used there, because a coastal missile system, at least the launch platform, is involved. But I think within a day it will become clear. Neptune Long, it's the same situation. That is, it's launched from a coastal missile system. Naturally, Mishpap is involved in this. The main targets for this kind of cruise missile, thank you, targets that need to be hit. For example, after all, a 150 kilogram warhead is not the same as a drone's 20 kilograms or 50, whatever they carry. A 150 kilogram warhead can reach and detonate, just as we see now, presumably, let's put it that way for now, a warehouse with missiles and aerial bombs was blown up in Engels. Naturally, the same kind of warhead can do the job. The same goes for Tuapse, or for breaching their detonation systems, or at pumping stations. This is one of our main tasks right now. God forbid it gets stopped. Right now, all these people who are not part of our government are running around with the idea of how to secure the Russian hydrocarbon sector. So God forbid these strikes are stopped like they were last year. If last year in May the sanctions of Malyuk and Budanov hadn't been stopped, this year there wouldn't be any, because there would be nothing left to destroy. We would have just burned everything down over the past year. Now it turns out they're trying to stop these strikes. The missile is very good. It's our basic missile, Neptune and Maylong, or Neptune. It's basically the X-35 missile. At one time, it was also produced at our facility with our engines for this missile, turbojet engines, dual circuit missiles. It was an air-to-ship missile. That's its main purpose, meaning it's an anti-ship system. The missile was later upgraded to be able to strike ground targets, and with a good engine and additional fuel tanks, it can now cover more than 500 kilometers. So at the very least, it reached 500 kilometers to Toksi. I think it could have also hit Engels, because they basically broke into a warehouse that was sealed. These missiles aren't just lying around outside. So since it was sealed and then broken into, it most likely means a missile got inside. But there's no confirmation yet, so we won't confirm it either for now. This is just an analytical note.
Roman Igorovich, just to clarify for our audience, what is the range of this missile and what new possibilities does this open up for us? Let's make sure we record this now.
Well, the confirmed range of the missile is at least 500 to 600 kilometers, that's for sure. We saw this with Tuapse and maybe now with Engels as well. Engels is a little over 600 kilometers away. And the actual stated range, so what does 500 to 600 kilometers really mean? Well, it's like a semicircle from Moscow through Engels to Tuapse. Just draw that circle. That's the entire area we can reliably hit with this missile. And the stated range, 1,000 kilometers, that would let you, for example, set the compass at St. Petersburg and draw a semicircle almost reaching the Caucasus. So that would already cover areas closer to Kazakhstan. To the east, it would reach beyond the Volga, at least past Engels and Astrakhan, closer to Kazakhstan. And to the south, this particular missile would effectively reach the North Caucasus region if the officially stated range accurately matches its actual flight range. Technically, this is possible. The engine is very good. It's our engine, the one we produce. It will definitely run for an hour, and the missile speed is 850 kilometers per hour. So running for an hour or an hour and a half is not a problem. The main thing is the fuel. Basically, however many extra buckets of fuel you put into the missile, that's how far it will fly.
That means Moscow, St. Petersburg, and military infrastructure targets could be attacked.
Well, definitely they're already under serious targeting, and in order for us to fully carry out our tasks to ensure the security of our border, we need to reach about 2,000 kilometers. Roughly speaking, we need to be able to reach the Urals. It's 2,000 kilometers to the Urals. But as for cruise missiles, it's hardly worth it, for example, to make cruise missiles with such a range right now. Ideally, of course, either drones, they're a bit cheaper, or ballistic missiles. For this kind of range, either solid fuel or liquid fuel, that is, ballistic missiles. I think if we don't resolve this issue this year, then we'll do it next year.
More good news, the main intelligence directorate successfully attacked Russian targets in occupied Crimea. Air defense systems, naval vessels, and a helicopter came under attack. 13 Russian radar stations were hit, including one L-125, not Niobiy-SV, not BSV, and BRLS Mys. How do you assess the work of the GUR? As I understand it, all of this was done over a certain period of time, and now it's been documented.
Well, it definitely took several months. This is the work of the GUR specs, Magur. The main intelligence directorate and the security service, their BECs, practically from unmanned boats, they turned them into aircraft carriers. Both of them, both the GUR's Magur and the SBU's Sibibi. They can now operate almost like aircraft carriers, carrying unmanned aerial vehicles, drones, and they can also carry unmanned surface and underwater vehicles, meaning they can function as a kind of mothership and relay station at the same time. Here is a rather significant boat, several meters in length and of a considerable width, which is specifically designed to take unmanned aerial vehicles on board, for example, and then carefully approach the coast of Crimea or some other strategically important Russian territory, perhaps somewhere much closer to Novorossiysk for various operational purposes, and from several kilometers off the coast. It can effectively launch unmanned drones under direct human control, utilizing the boat itself as a crucial relay station for communication and operation. The guys can carry out a combat mission just like they do directly with, say, those same FPV drones. That is a certain type of drone, a UAV, takes off and then destroys a Russian radar system, an anti-aircraft missile system, or some other military target, depending on its capabilities. Especially the GUR's Magura drones, which can also carry air-to-sea missiles, depending on the launch configuration. This is the R-73 air-to-air missile, an excellent missile. It's already half a century old. Thousands of them have been produced, and we have thousands of them. It has a thermal homing head, so if you lock it on, the missile will acquire the target and chase it down. And if there are two missiles, Magura drones can carry two missiles. So this also means the destruction of aerial targets. Here is confirmation of a helicopter being destroyed. In fact, definitely more than one. One was completely destroyed, and the second was seriously damaged. So in this sense, the GUR operators have practically become naval aviators, I would say. In other words, the GUR has ventured into a field that isn't typical for them, and they've performed quite well there. And the security service under Malyuk, that is the GUR under Budanov's leadership, and the SPU under Malyuk's leadership. Under Malyuk's leadership, they are now using practically the entire range of strike capabilities, and what's more, they're producing them on their own bases, which is very important. These are intelligence agencies operating from their own bases at their own expense. After all, their budgets are quite small. They're not the armed forces of Ukraine. They don't have Umarov's billions or hundreds of billions, but still, they've managed to find sponsors on their own, most likely perhaps, and they've accomplished tasks of this kind. Well, good for them. There's nothing more to add.
Tamar Nigovich, before we talk with you about the Belgorod region and the information from Russian military correspondents, I would like you to give us a brief overview of the Ukrainian Grom-2 missile system. What are its potential capabilities and how should these capabilities be used? Please, the floor is yours.
To understand the process, what is the Grom-2? It's essentially the same as the Iskander in terms of range and warhead and in terms of its control system. So we have our own version of the Iskander Several decades ago, a good project was launched called Sapsan, as it was known. Based on this, Sapsan, a solid fuel ballistic missile system, was developed for the Grom series. And naturally, this project produced results. That is, work on this project. We have the Grom 1 and Grom 2 now, with a range of 300 kilometers. We developed it, sold it with an audit. And by the way, we sold it for Saudi money, including the technical documentation. But most likely, the intervention of our partners allowed us to get at least the technical documentation back, maybe some launchers. And I wouldn't rule out that we got some missiles back as well. So you could say, what is the Grom 2? It's basically the same as the Iskander, 500 kilometers. Moscow, Tuapse, that's the 500-kilometer range. So if there are enough ballistic missiles, then Rubliovka, remember we once talked about this, those Rubliovka export ladies would be better off getting as far away as possible from those bathhouses where the main decisions for further military actions in Russia are made. Why? Because the first Grom should definitely bury Lenin. Because, well, how much longer is he going to lie there after all? The Kremlin is the first target and the second is Rubliovka, or maybe the other way around, depending on preference. Maybe Rubliovka will actually be the first to go.
Roman Nikolaevich, now, of course, this information has been circulating for several days in Russian propaganda channels and among Russian war correspondents, because in Russia, they are claiming that the Ukrainian armed forces are attempting to break through into the Belgorod region. What is known about this? Let's analyze it.
To understand the situation, we have about 600 kilometers of border, if you draw a straight line without the curves between Belarus and Oskol. This is the border between Ukraine and Russia. On our side, it runs through the Chernihiv, Sumy, and Kharkiv regions up to Oskol. On the Russian side, it is the Bryansk, Kursk, and Belgorod regions. For us, the main task is this borderline, to turn it into a front line, because that's the right and smart thing to do. The architecture of the front needs to be changed. We need to open the northern front. It has already been opened after we started advancing towards the Kursk direction, towards Moscow, as some extremely deluded idiots call it. For the main task of tying down the enemy, several tens of thousands of Russian troops were pinned down there. And of course, the creation of the so-called security zone or buffer zone, people call it differently. It could also be called a support zone if it's a front line and a mine strip. We need to create such a security zone, a demilitarized zone about 30 kilometers deep into Russian territory, but the Russians denazify it. They immediately start bombarding it with aerial bombs, artillery, and evacuate the civilian population from there. So that's what a buffer zone is like. It's being created even without advancing 30 kilometers. You can go in 3, 5, or 7 kilometers, but onto Russian territory to lay mines there. Not on our land, but on Russian territory. If you lay a few 100,000 of those mines, they'll be digging them out for 100 years, if they even bother at all. And naturally, army artillery can add another 25 kilometers, extending the creation of such a buffer zone up to 30 kilometers. We did this in the Kursk direction. We accomplished it. The only retreat, as we've already mentioned, was almost catastrophic because the decision to withdraw and redeploy to defensive positions was made too late. What we're doing now in the Belgorod region is essentially the same kind of operation, only not as deep, without an operational breakthrough, a tactical operation involving an incursion and the creation of such a buffer zone on Belgorod territory, taking up the best defensive positions. The thing is, the difference in elevation there, it's the so-called Central Russian upland. The difference in height is 50 to 70 meters. And between, just for understanding, between the hills, yes. So the rivers, or rather the small streams that are there, the little creeks, they're at an elevation of about 140 meters above sea level, while the tops of these uplands are around 220 to 230 meters. So it's better to take control of these elevation changes. It doesn't matter where they are, on our side or the Russian side. If there is an opportunity to enter Russian territory to improve defensive positions, that task is carried out. Right now, in the Demidovka area, a mission is being carried out in the Belgorod direction. Well, the first issue is, of course, creating this kind of buffer zone. And the second is to try to intercept Russian reserves, which will now be freed up from the Kursk direction as we withdraw. Along the borderline, they will be redeployed to the eastern front so that they don't end up in the Pokrovsk direction where they might have about 2 divisions. That's practically 30,000 Russian troops who could now be transferred from the Kursk direction to the eastern front. And they will be passing right by, or rather through the Belgorod region. And so in order to intercept them, I think that's why such pressure is being created right now. In the Belgorod region, there is a positive trend at the moment, at least for now. Of course, we can't discuss tactical matters, even if we knew them. Well, you can't broadcast tactical information on air. But in reality, I think in a week, we'll be able to talk about the results of this tactical operation.
The Russians have claimed to have allegedly shot down an F-16 over the Sumy region. The Air Force has already debunked this fake news. And as Andrei Demchenko reports, the Russians are storming the border of the Sumy region on ATVs. New Su aircraft are destroying their groups. What do you think, Roman Hryhorovich?
Well, they got scared by the information that came out a few days ago. There was a really good video showing the use of F-16S over Sumy. Naturally, the Russian SUs responded differently. From a logical and tactical standpoint, they acted correctly. Our own CPD and CPSO teams should also take this as an example. After all, FSB and KGB officers have been conducting these psychological special operations for 100 years. They needed to carry out such a PSYOP because the appearance of F-16S practically at the line of contact really rattled the Russians. Combat missions were carried out at extremely low altitudes, most likely to drop certain munitions below the Russian radar horizon. Naturally, no one could reach it with air defense, and that really hit the Russians in this area. Of course, they needed to counter this information, so they made up another story about shooting down an F-16. Believe me, in this direction, no one has shot anything down. I have enough friends who would have shared any information if something had happened, and I can confidently say that no one shot anything down. The guys are working. Along the entire line of contact, both F-16S and Mirages are operating. They've already started carrying out combat missions in those specific directions where it is indeed possible, based on the overall density of enemy air defenses and our own inherent ability to effectively cover these valuable aircraft. Gods do. Go ahead and fill in the rest yourselves, so I don't have to swear too much. This is that so-called God's race in Trump's eyes, the one organized by Putin. For what purpose? Well, in order to create a certain amount of pressure. The Ukrainian side is running the same kind of IPSO, an information and psychological special operation, in which top officials are involved. This is a serious state operation. For what purpose? To give the Russian population, mainly the Russian population, of course, as well as Trump and those following Ukraine, a chance to try to suppress or paint a different picture of the real events happening on the Kursk land. We're holding Kursk land. No one is surrounded there. We're holding on. But the withdrawal was indeed delayed, and I would call it a retreat. If, as we said, a month and a half ago, there had been an organized withdrawal, then it would have been a controlled move to defensive lines. It was a retreat, but still to defensive lines located on Russian territory. That's the difference we were talking about. The Sudzha River in Kursk, well, along the Kurshina, which runs there, and the Perepluyka stream, but its elevation is 140 meters above sea level. There are heights just to the south. Somewhere the elevation already reaches 220 meters. So here there's at least a 50 to 70 meter rise. And this is Kursk land. And on these heights, our units that withdrew from the Sudzha direction have taken up positions. And at the moment, no one intends to retreat any further. Naturally, the Russians need to show that they're surrounded there, that everything is lost. Boss, the client is leaving, the cast is coming off, everything is lost, and so on and so forth. They're trying to cut us off, but they're still very far from encircling us. It's simply unrealistic because along the borderline, there are these ridges. That's where we're positioned. And of course, our troops are present there. In the Kursk region, I don't think we'll be leaving from there. It's a good defensive line. And the Russians who are trying to cut off our direction have gotten stuck in the Basovka area. So yes, that's the Sumy region, Sumy territory, and it's only a few kilometers away. From the borderline, nothing more. They're trying to somehow break through to cut off the supply to this group. But in the information space, to somehow ramp up the pressure, well, Putin has thrown out some sweet talk, let's put it mildly, thrown in Trump, and now Trump is just mirroring it. What else can he do? Right now, Putin is tied to him by his non-involvement in that adventure they started together with Netanyahu in the Middle East. Once again, strikes are being carried out against the Houthis, against Gaza, against Lebanon, against Syria. Naturally, if the Russians have their say there, it won't end well for anyone. That's for sure. Most likely strikes against Iran in the Middle East are ahead, and Trump has been dragged into them. And now they have nowhere to turn. Well, Witkov got involved, and after all, he's such a great Israeli-American or American-Israeli for us. That's why Russian oil refineries of all kinds and levels will keep burning. maybe not with the same intensity, and it will be presented a bit differently. Not sanctions, for example, or the actions of the Ukrainian defense forces, but the work of local underground groups of various levels. I think that this kind of work by our informants, by the way, could be just as effective as the Ukrainian defense forces are now. And believe me, tens of millions of Ukrainians will definitely not stop fighting for their land, for their sovereignty, for their territorial integrity. And you won't be able to turn around several million residents of Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea.
Dear audience, please like this video. Write a few kind words in the comments to support the armed forces of Ukraine. Share your thoughts about this situation as a whole. Renowned analyst Roman Svitan, Roman Grigorievich, thank you, and as always, see you next week.
Goodbye.